games. Even Battlefield 2, when it's at its smallest, has some structural similarities to Halo at its largest, but only one of those kept going forward with power weapons. If we were to draw any conclusion though, it might be that people were getting tired of the type of gameplay structure the power weapons created, which would lend reason to why all of these games were successful in different ways. Another connection would be a move towards a greater degree of player choice. With each of these games letting you pick and choose your loadout to an extent, players had the opportunity to break free of the somewhat rigid choices that games involving power weapons had. That's not to say that a game like Quake or Halo didn't have player expression, more so that expression was nuanced and not as distinctive. With players being able to pick loadouts, it makes sense that power weapons would be a non-option. Even excluding the idea that you could just pick the most powerful weapon from the start, they might have diminished the value a player had in their choice of loadout by always subtracting it for the statistically better option when they find it. That might be the reason that Halo Reach, which had match-specific loadouts and power weapons, often saw identical setups for guns with a choice of armor abilities, none of which could be swapped out in conventional game modes. That said, I don't think a more hands-on ability for the players to express themselves was the culprit either. While power weapons weren't present, these games still had power structures, where the strength of the player is determined by properties of the game rather than the player's ability. In Years of Old, power weapons were power structures, but here that's presented through properties, vehicles, and kill streaks. If we allude that player expression is reduced by the existence of power structures, then it would make sense why power weapons stopped existing. It wouldn't explain why these games still had power structures. It's what caused these power structures to morph that I think is the strongest link between all of these games. Time to kill. With the average TTK getting lower and lower, power weapons just didn't have the room to fulfill the adjective in the noun. Their identity comes from the vast leap in strength over other options, but without intentionally weak weapons, that identity begins to dissipate. That in turn forced power structures to make changes, which in this circumstance inevitably killed off the power weapon. However, if we assume all that to be true, the time to kill likely didn't commit murder. It would have been manslaughter. Because the reduction in time to kill is also an entwined byproduct of the shifting market of games. Between the 1990s and the 2000s, a lot of games found themselves set within the realm of high fantasy or science fiction. One of the reasons for that would be the ripples of nerd culture in the 60s and 70s, with Star Trek, Star Wars, and Alien influencing the interests of people who were able to make games at the time. And another would be the limitations of technology. Graphics hardware was limited, and so in order to wow audiences, you had to take a lot of creative liberties in what you were portraying. Something quite hard if you're trying to convince someone of reality. But if your setting is thoroughly fictional, it allows for spectacle in the absence of high fidelity. This isn't just limited to the FPS. Racing games also dive into sci-fi more frequently in this era, and in both genres you can see examples where the abstraction of the setting also brings systems of fantasy, gravity-defying cars, and guns that are basically pea-shooters thanks to fictional armor. It's hard to say if the aesthetics influenced the mechanics or vice versa, but it's likely that they were intertwined in some regard. 90s racing games that played their cards close to aesthetic reality also attempted to reflect reality in the systems, even if technology left them with handling models that we now recognize as arcadey. In that science fiction setting, power weapons made perfect sense, both aesthetically and functionally. But once the 2000s hit, commercially available hardware was making leaps and bounds forward. As a result, graphical direction that resembled real life was not only feasible, but also a great way to show off to an audience and leave a positive impression. In both genres, this led to games where visual fidelity leaned towards realism, but improvements in visuals alone didn't encourage gameplay changes. Look at a title like Gears of War. Though it's a game where the visual fidelity aims at realism, the other science fiction elements still allow for power weapons to fit the aesthetic. That's the problem though. Around the time hardware started to improve, science fiction was slowly bleeding out. Popular aesthetics was shifting away from future fantasy and towards military fiction. There might be a reason for this. Maybe it's something that happened in 2001 in New York, involved a plane. To actually, it's a mystery, I guess. Regardless, the amount of active US military participants is anything to go by. There was an uptick in Western patriotism and nationalism after 2001, and subsequently in 2003 with the US and UK invasion of Iraq after several years of rapidly declining deployed service. Using this as an indicator, wartime efforts were more likely to be useless, and in some cases, that's reflected in the media produced. Films like The Hurt Locker, which seems to want to tell an anti-war story with arguable success, or Rise Against Hero of War, the least subtle anti-war song that, if the YouTube comments are anything to go by, was painfully misinterpreted as a pro-military and nationalist battle theme. This cultural shift in attention has some reflections in almost all Western media, but the further around of graphical realism set the stage for games to be acutely vulnerable to this shift. Even prior to the painful flood that modern warfare would incite, wartime narrative, especially around World War II, was on the rise thanks to games like Medal of Honor, Company of Heroes, Day of Defeat, and once again, Call of Duty. As these games got closer to reality, it would only make sense that they move away from science fiction aesthetics as well as mechanics. This meant less vertical combat spaces, no massive health pools, and just as importantly, no power weapons. I want to say that's where the case ends. We found our man, but in reality, there's still too many loose threads to land on any solid conclusion. Around 2016, science fiction in games was back on the rise, but power weapons were nowhere to be seen. Instead, a new power structure of temporary massive bursts in power through ultimates was on the rise with the likes of Overwatch and, to a lesser extent, Titanfall. So although the aesthetic concept had returned, its systems were different. That's also ignoring games that did attempt to bring a revival to power weapons, like Quick Champions, Toxic, or Splitgate, but only saw an incredibly niche fanfare. Although our three suspects made set similarities, could games like Team Fortress 2 in 2007, Brink in 2011, cut the links we observed and reveal causation as merely correlation? What if red guns in Apex or gold weapons in Fortnite are the evolution of the power weapon? What if the power weapon was showing signs of illness before the 2000s, and their disappearance is through more natural causes? Unfortunately, the infinite sprawl of the games industry, along with everything that might impact it, those questions will remain a mystery. The only thing that's certain is that here and now, power weapon is still missing. Howdy, just want to come through at the end of the video and say thank you for watching. Sorry that this video took ages again, but I now have a Patreon. I mean, I had it for like 6 months. But everything on it is free. It's mostly write-ups about the creative process, but if you want to support the videos, and I mean, I guess it really is just supporting the videos, then you can do that over there.
I create the machines to assist.
Be nice. Give me your hand. Don't let those incompetent appraisers make your hand dirty.
Ugh. I don't need healers. Comfort is more important.
Let's just go with
the E team.
is ringing, my dear. I don't have much to contribute. Let's go, Citri.
Turn into ashes.
Go. Citri, hold them off. Go. Face your fear head on. Too noisy. Quiet. Face your fear head on. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. Too noisy. Quiet. Face your fear head. Thank you for tuning in. The contorted faces and terrified.
Sigewinne is the brand new 5-star Hydro Healer added to Genshin Impact for version 4.7. She's been anticipated by some, dreaded by others, and I've been testing her with every possible team I could think of to find out if she's worth
Why would she be dreaded?
and how to make the most of her if you decide to get her. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. I'd like to start off by saying that she has an extremely cute design, and all of her animations are exceptionally well done, with lots of cute little details put into them, and her kit, although not the most damaging, is full of little quality of life. For example, her elemental skill, which heals the whole team, and it does so from off-field, and it does so really, really well. Even with Farina, and even with enemies attacking me, there was never a time where Sigewinne failed to heal the whole party, and compared to the likes of other, especially Hydro healers like Kokomi or Barbara, her healing is unmatched. In fact, it feels like some of the strongest healing in the game, all things considered. My team was constantly topped off, and it doesn't matter whether you have her signature or a 4-star weapon or what you're doing, she heals a lot. Her skill deals some HP damage, although unfortunately its duration isn't super long, it's only 10 seconds, so if you're relying on it for healing, it's not so bad, because usually that lasts 5 to 10 seconds. It's okay to not have as much healing around for, but with an 18-second cooldown, your Hydro application, if you're relying on Sigewinne, and her healing, if again you need it during that time, it can definitely suffer. Her burst has a pretty high 70 energy cost, and in a lot of teams you won't be building around your burst and often won't be using it at all. She does have full interruption resistance while in her burst, which is absolutely hilarious, but there's also no way to switch out of it, so if you accidentally press it and you didn't mean to, you're locked into the animation for the whole duration. It does decent damage if you build for it, because it is based off of her max HP, but with only a 2.5 second duration and an 18-second
and energy cost, it's just not enough DPS to really build anything around. She has a passive that buffs elemental skill damage done by your party up to 10 times, and unfortunately this is 10 times shared by your whole party. So if you were thinking of making a team focusing on elemental skill damage, like was my first instinct, such as with Chiori and Albedo and Farina, well, unfortunately that just won't go that well because she only buffs 10 instances of skill damage and it's shared across all of these characters. So Farina will take some, Albedo will take some, Chiori will take some, before they've all done, 3 hits, that's it, you're out of elemental skill buffs. If you ran Navi on the team, for example, maybe she gets one of her skill buffs, but it's likely that Farina and Chiori will steal the other ones, and you won't even have all of Navi's skills buffed. It's very unfortunate they decided to give it this way. I wish it wasn't a flat damage buff, the way that it's similar to how Shenhe and Yujin work. I wish it was just a static, always applying buff to all elemental skills. It's not like it's a particularly huge buff. It would have made making an elemental skill team feel much better, but as it is, it basically just means it's a tiny Farina buff, and that's about it. She also has the ability to create source water droplets when you use her hold skill, but I've found that her hold skill takes quite a while, and so usually isn't really worth using unless you're using a tape that has tons of field time. And the extra effect of regenerating energy when creating a source water droplet and healing off the bond of life that it creates is generally just not worth doing. She has another passive that's kind of confusing that increases healing based on the total bond of life for your whole party. This implies that you should use her like someone with someone like Arlecchino or Florent, but Florent also already heals plenty when having Farina on the team, and adding Sigewinne just greatly reduces the total damage you're able to do. And Arlecchino can't be healed at all, so really doesn't want Sigewinne on the team. So I'm really confused as to what this passive would be for. If I hear about it, I'll put it in the pinned comment because I can't think of anything that this is good for, but I'm sure you guys will correct me and I'll add it to the pinned comment. Any corrections that I learn after release will be in the pinned comment. Now that we understand her kit, let's finish off with any pros and cons that I might have missed. Her hydro application comes mainly from her skill, and it's pretty low, it's pretty slow, and it only lasts, again, 10 seconds, so not very good off-field hydro application. This makes her pretty lackluster play in a lot of teams where you want an off-field hydro character, and her burst only lasting 2.5 seconds makes it hard to build a team around, although I did find myself wanting